The 5th century AD. Terror consumes Western civilization. Sparrows blacken the sky. The Roman Empire comes under siege by barbarians. Their principal weapon is fear, and they wield it with a fury. They are the Huns, violent invaders from the east, seemingly bent on sheer destruction. It's 443 AD. The scales of history are about to tip. The Huns have swept westward and established an uneasy alliance with the Eastern Roman Empire. For land and a hefty annual tribute, the Huns...
One of the most pivotal events in human history was the fall of the Western Roman Empire. This event did not have one overarching or encompassing cause, but many. The most catastrophic and dramatic of these causes was the mass migration of Germanic peoples into the Roman Empire. They were not merely invading, taking advantage of a weakened Rome, but fleeing from an enemy they viewed as a greater threat. They were the Huns. The Romans had never encountered anyone like them before. The face of the Germanic tribes previously subordinate to them gathered together and overthrew the Huns. The Gepids established a new kingdom, where the Huns' base of operations had been in the Pannonian Basin. Although the Huns' might was ephemeral, their legacy was long-lasting. Attila is a major character in 3 later Norse sagas, the Magyars, that later...
Do you know what the Franks, Lombards, Vandals, and Huns have in common? They are all tribes that conquered parts of Europe. The Huns were fierce nomads who were probably feared more than any tribe in history. Their skilled horsemen had something that other people didn't: stirrups to help with their balance while they fought. They attacked Europe between the 3rd and 5th centuries. Their most ruthless leader was Attila the Hun, who was born around 406 AD. The Romans thought he was sent as a punishment. They called him the Scourge of God. Several other tribes migrated from the northeast around 400 AD. They are called Germanic tribes because their languages were similar to modern-day German. Many of these people were farmers and herders. They adopted Christianity and settled in Europe. They did not have a right adopted Christianity and settled in Europe. They adopted Christianity and settled in Europe. They did not have a writing system or cities. These tribes included the Franks, Goths, Vandals, Burgundians, Lombards, and Alemanni. They ruled Europe between 400 and 700 AD. The Visigoths moved into Roman territory in the 300s. They feared the Huns and agreed to be loyal to Rome. The Romans did not treat them fairly. They even made some Visigoths slaves. A Visigoth leader named Alaic decided to fight the Romans. In 410, the Visigoths destroyed Rome. What do you think the Romans could have done to keep them from rebelling? The Ostrogoths conquered most of Italy, Greece, and the Western Balkans. The Vandals conquered Spain. They raided Italy and conquered the Visigoths in 455. We get the word Vandal, meaning a person who deliberately destroys property, from the Vandals. One of the strongest kingdoms, the Franks, began around 481 AD. Their leader Clovis conquered the Roman area called Gaul. As different Germanic tribes fought each other, the defeated tribes were given a choice. They could leave the area or stay and live with the winning tribe. The tribes that lived together began to merge, which led to the beginning of large nations. Another era of invasion occurred between the 800s and 1000s. The Muslims came from the south, the nomadic Magyars came from the east, and the Vikings came from the north. The Vikings weren't a single group, but they shared the Norse language. They came from the Scandinavian countries of Denmark, Norway, and Sweden. They dominated Europe from about 750 to 1100 AD, a time called the Viking Age. Because of their poor land and cold weather, the Vikings relied on the sea for their food. They built longships to sail to other lands to trade, raid, and steal. The ships had colorful wool sails, but also about 100 men who would row if there was no wind. From Iceland to Russia to Constantinople and down the rivers of Europe, the Vikings made their mark, terrifying those who stood in their way. Viking explorer Eric discovered Iceland in about 982 and Greenland a few years later. Historians believe that his son Leif Erikson may have come to North America about 500 years before Columbus. Eventually, the Vikings merged into the European culture. English words like husband, window, and egg come from the Norse language.
Who felt that maybe we can win these people over, made a compromise. And you start to see changes going on from the early part of the Christian era in Southern Europe, where the major ceremonies held by the nature-worshipping people are combined with Christian names and Christian ceremonies, and therefore what comes forth to us is a mixture with the two streams coming together, where you get a monotheistic name or a monotheistic character with a pagan ceremony. And so the mixture of this together is what is giving us the present day holidays that we see.
Several other tribes migrated from the northeast around 400 AD. They are called Germanic tribes because their languages were similar to modern-day German. Many of these people were farmers and herders. They adopted Christianity and settled in Europe. 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 Included the Franks, Goths, Vandals, Burgundians, Lombards, and Alemanni. They ruled Europe. Included the Franks, Goths, Vandals, Burgundians, Lombards, and Alemanni. They ruled Europe between 400 and 700 AD.
Who felt that maybe we can win these people over, made a compromise. And you start to see changes going on from the early part of the Christian era in Southern Europe, where the major ceremonies held by the nature-worshipping people are combined with Christian names and Christian ceremonies, and therefore what comes forth to us is a mixture with the two streams coming together, where you get a monotheistic name or a monotheistic character with a pagan ceremony. And so the mixture of this together is what is giving us the present day holidays that we see. And so when the Church of England imposed this harsh penalty upon people who practice Christmas, they moved it to New Year's Eve. Now, New Year's Eve historically in the North was known as Hogmanay. Originally, the New Year for the Romans was March 1st. That was the New Year, not January 1st. So all of you who on January 1st, where was I on January 1st? You're waiting for the light to go up in Times Square. The reality is, for the Romans, March 1st was the beginning of the year. And when you look at the number 7 in Latin, you find Septem. So September was the 7th month, October, November, December. And so you find that the Latin words for these last months, October, November, December, 8, 9, and 10. So these weren't the last months of the year. It was 8, 9, and 10. And so what actually happened was, when they imposed the new year on January, it is for the ancient god, or their so-called god called Janus, the two-faced god, two faces, who shows you one face and behind it is another face, the master hypocrite. And so this is what is going on at this occasion. And we find now that on January 1st, right on that evening, December 31st, when it changes, you find people are usually drinking. They're involved in some sexual activity at that time. The whole concept of Jesus and monotheism is lost. It is the other religion. Is that after January, in February, that somewhere around the middle of February, there was a celebration that was known by the ancient Romans as the Lupercalia. And the Lupercalia was a ceremony, and luper means wolf. And they depicted a wolf chasing a little girl. And so they had a ceremony I'm not making this up, by the way, right? If you want to, you can look this up. If you don't believe me, go to the encyclopedia right after we're finished. Valentine's Day, Easter, Christmas. Look up Valentine's Day, Easter, Christmas, and Halloween, and you'll find everything I'm talking about. Okay? You want to go deeper into it, go in the look up the pagan roots of all of these holidays. And the Lupercalia was the celebration of the wolf. And the authorities there would gather together young people, and they would put their names into a box, men and women, and they would take out the names, and whoever was your partner, whoever you picked, whatever name you picked, was your partner for the day, and all types of sexual activity went on during that day. They were totally out of control. That is the Lupercalia. That's what it really means. Okay? Now, by the name of Valentine, he was trying to work with the Roman soldiers because the Roman emperor had imposed upon his soldiers that anybody who joined the army could not get married. Because if you got married, you're thinking about your wife all the time, and you're a useless soldier. But the soldiers wanted to get married, so St. Valentine worked with them, and he was captured by the Roman emperor, he was imprisoned, and he was beheaded. And so a legend formed around St. Valentine's Day. In one case, it's under. We find that the spring solstice season comes about. Now, this is another very powerful season. In this time, the darkness and the cold are leaving. And now the spring is coming. Light has returned. It is the resurrection of life after death. And so with the light and the water and the rain, light spring solstice, in the northern countries, a fertility celebration came about. And the main figure in that fertility celebration was their goddess Ostre or Ostern. And according to them, she waved her wand and life came back after death. And so the symbols of that occasion became rabbits, bunny rabbits, chickens, eggs. You take two rabbits and put them in the backyard, and after a couple of days, there's rabbits jumping around everywhere in the back. It's a fertility symbol. And so therefore, this became the symbol. Now, the compromise. The Christians coming in now who want to get benefit from the nature worshiping people, they use that saying, if you can't beat them, join them. So they came along and they joined them. At Easter, look at it. This is supposed to be the time of the death and resurrection of Isa alayhi salam, but it is the pagan rite of the resurrection of life after death. And so they impose this occasion onto the spring season, and you find then both of these celebrations coming about at one time. The fall season. The Celtic people of the north used to believe that during the fall season their year began. And actually for the Celtics, their New Year's was November 1st. October 31st was the final day of the year for the Celtic people of the north. And that day was called the Day of Samhain. And this individual, wal-iyadhu billah, was supposed to be their god of the spirits of the dead, of evil again. And according to their belief, the evil spirits would rise to the surface and would terrorize people on that evening. And on that evening, if you did something wrong to a person, they'd come back to get you on that night. So some people would put on a disguise, so you couldn't recognize them on October 31st on that evening, and then they would be safe. Also, they would burn fires. Now the only thing we find left of that is the jack-o'-lantern that they were put inside of their window, made from the pumpkin. What actually happened in Europe said was that the 31st night is All Hallows Evening. All Hallows Evening, which in America later became known as Halloween. Halloween. And they depict the forces of evil. What is happening now is that the children put on disguises. They dress as little devils, little witches, as goblins, vampires, anything evil, and they go out. And now with the new, what actually happened in Europe is that the church moved All Saints' Day, a day for the saints. They moved it from May 13th to November 1st in 1834 AD. And around December 25th, the people celebrated the winter solstice. And so the winter solstice would come about somewhere from December 21st all the way to around January 6th or so. And so the people of the north would celebrate different holidays, have different occasions based upon the winter solstice. In the wintertime, also in ancient Greece, there was the Bacchanalia, which was held for their god Bacchus, the god of wine and sport and play. The Romans had the Saturnalia for their god Saturn, their main sun god Saturn. And so you find during these times that the people held ceremonies in the north. They would burn bonfires. The light was important, the fire, because the fire represents is a man called Mithra or Mithras. This is a very mysterious character. And when you look at history, you find that this individual called Mithra was born on December 25th. His day of the week was the 7th day of the week, that we still call Sunday. He was supposed to be the son of the sun god himself, and they had a special sacrament made up of bread and wine, and they would make this drink during this time, and supposedly he died for the sins of the people. Sounds familiar? But when you try to find Mithra or Mithras in the encyclopedias, they, through state intervention, erased the name. Why is this? That is because after the time of Jesus, Isa alayhi salam, when the message began to spread, number one, you have to understand this concept of Saturn, the concept of Bacchus. When they are portrayed by the different artists who drew pictures of them or the sculptures, they're usually portrayed as a heavy-set man with a white beard. And when in the Sistine Chapel, Michelangelo drew his picture, you could see the long flowing beard, and there are actually pictures of this man on a sled being drawn by snakes with wings. Snakes with wings. Snakes do not normally fly. But in this case, the snakes have wings, and the heavy